This is the last section actually of our symposium, and it's a great pleasure to have here this couple of speakers who are gonna talk about a book in German. The book is in German, and with this book we wanted to, ring a bell and to stress that there is a lot of literature written in other languages that should be uncovered and shared more. And so this is, Laura's book is one of these examples, actually. So let me introduce Laura von Ostrowski, who studied Indology, Religious Studies, and Romance Studies at Ludwig Maximilian University of Munich. From 2015 to 2018, she was a fellow of the DFG Research Training Group, Presence and Implicit Knowledge at FAU Erlangen-Nuremberg, and received her PhD in Religious Studies in 2021. The book to her PhD thesis was published open access under the title A Text in Motion, Ein Text in Bewegung, in 2022. Since 2007, she works as a yoga teacher and runs her own yoga studio in the center of Munich since 2018, and teaches about the history of modern yoga at the online education portal www.yogastudying.de, associated with the University of Hamburg in Germany. And so she will talk about Ein Text in Bewegung, and on the other side of the screen, we have Borayin Larios, who is a co-member of the Proyecto Yola, I'm going to mention later on, and recently came back to the Department of South Asian, Tibetan, and Buddhist Studies as an assistant professor at the University of Vienna after spending a year in Pondicherry as the head of the Indology department at the French Institute of Pondicherry and a researcher for the École Française d'Extrême-Orient. And he is one of the principal investigators in the recently awarded ERC Synergy Grant for the 6th-year research project Mantrams in Religion, Media, and Society in Global Southern Asia. And I'm very happy to have you both here, and the floor is yours.
Well, thank you so much for the kind introduction, and I'm very excited to be here. Thank you for the invitation to talk about, yes, a book in German, and one of the finest pieces of scholarship I've read in a while, precisely in another language that's not the hegemonic English. So yes, that's very exciting for me as well. And because we have very short time, I'd like to keep it short in the introduction so that we have a little bit more time to talk with Laura, because her book is very, very rich and it has amazing topics to discuss, in my opinion. So I'm just going to very briefly give an overview of her book in very broad strokes. And I think it's fair to say that Laura's book starts with the almost perennial question of what is yoga anyway, and what is yoga in the contemporary context. And I think is it merely gymnastics? Is it spirituality? Is it philosophy? Is it a religion, or is it all of the above together, or a combination thereof? So there's this long-standing question that has been influencing yoga studies in recent decades. And yeah, this long-standing question is at the heart of the discourse of what, quote unquote, is yoga philosophy. And of course, people have also been asking what is yoga philosophy anyway, especially also thinking about whether it's actually a philosophy in the Western sense, or is it more of a way of life, and so on and so forth. So Lara's comprehensive exploration delves deeply into this subject, and specifically focusing on the Yogasūtra, which is kind of like the modern Bible of yogis in the West, at least, and perhaps also for many in India as well. And so we often see this as in the West as the philosophical underpinning of physical yoga practice, and the Yoga Sutra is primarily devoted to meditative and soteriological themes. So there is a sort of a disconnect, and she very beautifully traces how the Yoga Sutra came to be this very foundational text for modern physical or body-based yoga, using Ashtanga yoga as her case study, Ashtanga yoga in the context of Germany. So her monograph traces the historical and ethnographic evolution of the Yoga Sutra up to the present day. So she starts by giving a very nice overview of the current state of research in modern yoga studies in the beginning, delving into different theories and sort of the trajectory of the recent years of yoga study. And then she, at the very beginning, gives a definition of what we would call now CYP, contemporary yoga philosophy, and this is something I'd like to talk more about with Laura in a second. So she gives this beautiful historical overview also in chapter 2, when she gives us a historical trajectory of Patanjali's Yoga Sutras and the assimilation of Patanjali's ideas, first in British India and then in the German-speaking world around 1900s, and then their adaptation within the sort of Ashtanga Yoga lineage with Krishnamacharya as the central figure, and then Patanjali Joyce. And then Laura moves into sort of the core of her argument and of her analysis, which is a cultural analysis, a very like an empirical investigation of basically yoga philosophy in the 21st century. This through the lens of Ashtanga yoga, and she examines the teaching methods, the space, the equipment, the body strategies, and the integration of Sanskrit, as well as key concepts of the Yoga Sutra into practice. So how is then the body related to the Yoga Sutra, and how this is done through different mechanics in the 21st century. And this is very unique and sort of at the center of her analysis. And throughout her book, she highlights the synthesis, basically, and the intercultural exchange that has shaped yoga philosophy, quote unquote, and she discusses how it has intertwined with movements such as body culture, New Age ideologies, positive psychology, and mindfulness practices, as well as emphasizing sort of the practical and the relevance for contemporary daily life as a central aspect of these CYP, so contemporary yoga philosophy. Yeah, that would be like my very, very short introduction to Lara's very, very rich book. And I think that one of the, in terms of the methodology, which was really unique, is that she looks at practitioners and takes them seriously and looks at them from an ethnographic perspective, precisely to locate how this yoga philosophy is translated into the worldviews. And she does this by looking at different primary sources that she collected throughout her field work, and this is something unique and quite exciting, and one of the highlights of the book for me. So if we can now move just to the conversation, I think that's a good moment to kind of bring Laura into the dialogue. So one of the first questions I would ask you, or if you could just talk about what you think are the main contributions of your scholarship into the field of modern yoga studies.
Thanks, Borayin, for your introduction to my actually pretty big and German book. So I'm very happy to be invited here and to have, to be able to contribute to this great symposium, even if my book is in German, and there's a reason for that. But first, thanks Borayin for engaging with it. And there are not many people who can read German and engage with that material, so I'm very happy. So the book is in German, just one sentence before I answer your question, because I looked at translation processes, like two different translation processes. One is the translation from Sanskrit to German. And of course, there's always Sanskrit, or often Sanskrit to English to German. But if I do interviews with German teachers and German practitioners, I would have had to translate it back to English, which kind of changes things. And the second translation process was the one from textual knowledge, like knowledge derived from the Yogasūtra mainly, to practice. So I had these different translation processes, and another translation to English seemed to be too much or too difficult. But there's a little article coming out that summarizes my book in English in an anthology from Henriette Henke and Knut Jacobsen this fall, just to say that. So yeah, my main contributions, the main contributions of my scholarship to the field of modern yoga studies. Well, when I started to engage with the Yogasūtra, I mean, I guess as like many of you in Indology, this was my main study. It always, and I already practiced yoga at that time, and I saw that the big difference between how a philologist analyzes that text, and then how practitioners in my surrounding talk about that text and try to make it practical. And I realized that just looking at the text from an Indological perspective as a scholar somehow doesn't, it only comes to criticize what is happening in the field. It only comes to criticize what practitioners do with it, because it is so different from, of course, how philologists analyze the text. So I really wanted to take serious how contemporary practitioners engage with that text, even if it might not be philologically informed, even if it might not be, philologically informed. So this, I think, is a contribution that I really engaged with practitioners. I really engaged with so-called, I call them experts, because they are the ones that teach the Yoga Sutras, and students in the field, and see what do they do with the text today, and also where does it come from, and how is it possible to make that text practicable, even if it is so different practices to what Patanjali might talk about, just a seat or different kinds of seats, and then meditation practices. But today it's connected with movement practice. And if you take it seriously, it is a very interesting phenomenon, and it shows a lot about modern spirituality, about modern yoga. Yeah, so this is one contribution. And also then, when Elizabeth de Michelis in 2004, that's why we are all here, and celebrate 20 years of yoga studies, she made up this distinction, these categories of modern postural yoga, modern meditational yoga, and others. And many of us, I think, realized in the 21st century, many of us researchers, including Beatrix Hauser and Mathilde Tjolkos and me, we realized that this modern postural yoga, which is somehow only has, as de Michelis writes, a vague idea of philosophy, it is not, it turned to something different in the 21st century. There is a certain philosophy, we might just call it like that, just for simplicity, that it changed. So there is not only a movement practice that is derived of any philosophical context. no, it even changed in a way that they really grew together. So this is something that was the main observation in my field of Ashtanga yoga in the 21st century, especially here in Germany. And I think it just shows processes of change. So in modern or contemporary yoga, that in 2004, or in the time when Elizabeth did her research, I mean, were not that developed as it is right now. So a movement practice very much connected to philosophical topics. Yes.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you for that very concise and to the point answer. I think, I mean, I do feel that one of your most important contributions in general is this concept of contemporary yoga philosophy. And as you say, you contrast this to whatever the status quo has been so far in yoga studies in terms of classifying practice, right? And so you're pushing back a little bit to modern postural yoga being just about asana and not about philosophy. So how do you understand philosophy in this context, and what would be some key difference on how, for example, the Yoga Sutra is interpreted and practiced in contemporary settings versus what the Yoga Sutra traditionally is supposed to be?
Yeah. So the term philosophy is, of course, debatable. What I do is just taking this term also for reasons of simplicity, and because the people in my research field, they say philosophy, so it's more like an emic term that I use, but it's also, of course, related to yoga philosophy, like the Yogasūtra mainly, but also, or the Patanjali Yoga Shastra, but also the Bhagavad Gita, Hatha Yoga, and it's more like a worldview. It's maybe the Greek term philosophy does not really capture what is happening today, but for reasons of being able to talk about about yoga philosophy and its development from earlier times than through medieval ages up to today, it was just the easiest thing to talk about. And what I do, or what I did, actually, I came up with that term in the end of my research because then I had all the I had somehow all the data analyzed, and had all the data analyzed. And then in the end, because what I don't do is comparative research. So this is another question that we can talk about later if you want to. I don't compare, for example, Ashtanga yoga with Iyengar yoga, with Shivananda yoga, which would have been very interesting. But what I try to do is to look at one yoga style, and then this textual components and the physical practice, and like in depth the different kind of practices, like textual exercises, but then also body practices in detail, just in one style, but then all the different aspects that people are engaging with, very, let's say, concentrated. So I hope that this concept, this contemporary yoga philosophy, can be useful to researchers that are doing research in other yoga styles or in other countries. And I have to wait to see if it is useful. So I have 6 characteristics, and I can just explain them shortly so that one can see that I try to get away from that vague, oh, this is just a worldview that is somehow syncretistic, and somehow we don't really know what people mean today when they say yoga philosophy. So I really try to find characteristics. The first is synthesis. So that means that the Yoga Sutra will never be only interpreted purely, solely, but it will be, mainly is Vedanticized. So it has a Vedantic, monistic framework, which is means it is combined with Upanishadic contents, with Hatha yogic contents. And this, of course, as for example, Jason Birch's research highlights, has a history. So there's nothing that only modern practitioners do, but the Vedantization of the Yogasūtra or connection with Hatha yoga is already happened in India, for example, in texts in the 17th century, Yoga Chintamani and so on. But synthesis is really at the core of contemporary yoga philosophy. The second is breaking away from the textual tradition, which means that started with, of course, with Swami Vivekananda and others, the connection to the Bhashya, to the commentary literature, is mainly not there anymore. So the contemporary yoga philosophy is characterized by people writing their own commentaries to these sutras. Yeah. The third one is selection. Selection means there are only a few parts taken out of the text and others are left out. Also nothing that only happens in the 21st century, but that has a history. So the focus on the Ashtangas, of course, mainly, but also on other parts. But I also observed expansion. So while Vivekananda and others, Krishnamacharya, they mainly take out the Ashtangas, they fill it with different context, for example, from Hatha Yoga. But today, often the whole sutra is interpreted. So this is also, it kind of can be both today. Then the focus on everyday life. So you have to interpret the sutra in a way that it's somehow makes sense in your householder life. For example, Germany, 21st century. This was a very, very important part of what I call contemporary yoga philosophy. And the fifth is Sanskrit teaching and chanting. So the idea that we find in Desikachar, especially in the Krishnamacharya lineage, it might not be so, let's say, broadly distributed in other styles as in Ashtanga yoga or the Krishnamacharya lineage, is you can chant the Yoga Sutra and you will have the experience of the text by just uttering Sanskrit words, but it is a big part to have this Sanskrit as a medium in contemporary yoga philosophy. And the last one, and this was one of the main things that I looked at, is the reference to the physical practice. So it needs to be the contents taken from the Yoga Sutra or like this or synthetical kind of yoga philosophy. It has to be practicable. How's the English word? It should, especially in with asana practice, with modern or contemporary asana practice. So you have to be able to somehow experience this Yoga Sutra on the mat. So that was kind of one very big topic. And I don't know if I still have to talk about what makes it different from a traditional take on the Yoga Sutra, because there are quite some differences. I mean, everybody who knows the text a bit better knows that. But yeah, I hope that these categories, and of course I interviewed experts internationally, not only German ones, so also Ashtanga yoga teachers from all over the world, that this is something that is not, or these categories are not only for Ashtanga yoga, valid for Ashtanga yoga, but for contemporary yoga in general. Yeah, but I look forward to your thoughts, comments.
Thank you. I mean, I really find your categories interesting as a sort of a checkbox for, for this CYP. And my question to you, because you looked so very closely to Ashtanga in particular, even though you just mentioned that you also interviewed other experts, can we speak about with this category or with this tick list in mind, of a singular contemporary yoga philosophy, or if we sort of move away from Ashtanga-centric practice, can we talk of different or contemporary yoga philosophies in plural? I mean, how specific is the concept to your case study, or can we broaden this to other traditions, contemporary traditions today?
Yes, I mean, of course, I looked at many translations, like Desi Kachar's translation and others, all translations that were relevant to my field. So these translations are also BKS Iyengar's light on the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, and these are sources of other styles of yoga, of other groups of yoga, and of course, I read different books like. Doesn't matter. So different books on on similar case studies, and I do think that it is there are of course differences between different cultural spaces, but still we have a globalized and extremely connected contemporary yoga scene. So there is, I think, a lot. Different styles have a lot in common, but then like two things maybe. One thing that I think is very widespread is that contemporary practitioners want to keep their practice and still enrich it with religio-philosophical content. And how it then looks in detail might differ a bit. I think synthesis and focus on the practice, for example, they might just be pretty widespread, but there are, of course, like, for example, in your research field, Borayin, that you engage in now in yoga in South America, there is, for example, not much text-based focus. So where, how can one talk about yoga philosophy at all there, for example? So, but that would be also interesting when one knows that in other parts of the world right now there is this focus on, there is yoga philosophy, and we have to adapt, we have to kind of use it, or we have to cling to it and then make it somehow suit to our practices. Yeah, so in your field might be very different, but then you also have a framework to see, this is happening over there, and then it's not happening here. So I don't think it's worldwide spread, but this, yeah, clinging or wanting to not, for example, asana is just a preparation, as we heard in Daniela Bevilacqua's talk today, and now we do meditation after a while, but we want to keep the practice, but still make it more spiritual. Like, this is something that I think is pretty widespread, at least as how I observe it. And yeah, did you ask something else that I didn't answer?
No, I don't think so. I think you answered pretty well. While you were answering, I had a couple of thoughts also on, I mean, in relation to yoga philosophy and the notion of the scholar practitioner, because I think one of the very important contributions in your work is to sort of show, or you not only show that this is possible, but you sort of exemplify or inhabit this notion of the scholar practitioner, or the practitioner scholar, how everyone likes to see it, and has the different degrees of that. And why would that be important to take into consideration when we think about contemporary yoga practice seriously, also from a scholarly perspective? And I'm thinking also about when I was reading your yoga teacher trainings, right? How sort of the aspiration to have, the most accurate translation, but at the same time an accurate translation that relates to the practice. So maybe if you could just say a few words about that, and about how you position yourself in the field. You have your own yoga studio. You are the yoga nerd on Instagram. So I mean, you inhabit a space in which you are a practitioner and an expert as well. And so maybe if you could just comment a little bit on that. Slightly a large topic, but I thought, why not?
Yes, of course. I think it's an extremely relevant topic for many of us. Well, first of all, Shamim Black said that this morning. I think that one has to acknowledge and incorporate the subjectivity of one's own research. So there is nothing like what we pretended, or research or scholarship pretended like decades back, that we can just look at the material we engage with from a purely objective point of view. It's just not possible. But then when we are practitioners of the thing we research, it's getting even more intermingled. So how do we deal with that? And I found like two things important in my own engagement in the field. So first of all, of course, my research question only came up because I was trained in Shivananda yoga, actually. And then I just did a workshop on Ashtanga yoga, and I realized, wow, this is very different. What is that focus on the Yogasūtra there? So how is that happening here? So I came from, my research question only happened because I was engaged with the field and I knew so you have that kind of insider position, which is helpful, of course. And then I actually started to engage with Ashtanga yoga only for research. So that was my starting point. I don't know if it would have been if I would have been an ardent Ashtanga practitioner and then I do research exactly there with all my peers, I think that would have been very difficult. So there was one thing I started with. The other thing then is when one looks at this scholar practitioner topic, that I only realized while doing it and while having my methodology of, we didn't talk about that and it's maybe no time anymore, but one of my main methodological engagements was with body knowledge. So I really wanted to engage with what do practitioners do on the mat, which are the practices, and how do these practices change them, and how can I do research on that? But that also affects me. If I'm in the research field and I do these practices and I take seriously that practices change bodies and also change perception, because your nervous system is changed by a different breathing mechanisms that you use, your muscle tone is changed, and so on. So I realized that a researcher immersed in the field and engaging with the body practices also has to have some tools of observing him or herself to see how do I change through what I'm doing. And so I had body knowledge categories that I also let's say placed on myself. So I asked myself, I did of course lots of field notes. How does my body change, in what ways? And I actually, after all my research, I had to change back. So I had to kind of get the Ashtanga a bit out of my body again. But then, you can never do that fully, but it's interesting. So I think there are, how do you say, pitfalls, is that a word? So yeah, but there are also big chances of being a scholar practitioner. But I think we all have to engage in how can we do that well, to be in that fine line in between.
Yeah, that can of course be very tricky, but also very rewarding.
Yes.
Right?
Can I just butt in here very unceremoniously, because Jackie has a question and we'd love her to get to ask it.
For sure.
Thank you both, Borayin and Laura. Lovely to see you both. My question relates, Laura, to this wonderful term that you've coined, the contemporary yoga philosophy. And I did wonder, you touched on it a little bit in its relationship with, say, for example, Borayin's work in Latin America. But I wondered, because you said you engage with the Ashtanga Vinyasa community outside of Germany as well, did you find that it had regional expressions, or that there was reception histories within different cultural groups or areas of the expression of Ashtanga Vinyasa using the term contemporary yoga philosophy, how they were adapting the use of the textual sources?
Sorry, I'm not sure if I understood your question properly. So you want to know, I mean, contemporary yoga philosophy is my term, not the term.
Indeed. Yeah, no, sorry. Let me clarify. So your term that you've coined, and you said that your research was broader than Germany itself. And I just wondered whether you noticed in applying that across your regional exploration, did you notice that it was possible to apply it transnationally, or do you find that there's regional expressions of what this is, contemporary yoga philosophy?
Yes, I understand. Well, the term came up through my engagement with the Ashtanga Vinyasa community. The thing is, most German practitioners do engage with global teachers. There is no way out. So you have to engage with John Scott and Gregor Melle and all of them, and I also interviewed them. So this was my experience in the field, that even if they had a main teacher in Germany, which was Ronald Steiner, they went to workshops all over because these teachers travel and they come here. So in Ashtanga, there was a kind of these characteristics, these 6 characteristics that I worked out, they are applicable to my whole field in Germany and globally. Yeah, that was just for Ashtanga yoga now, but there may be a little regional distinction. I think Sanskrit has in Germany there's a pretty unique connection because of these old Indologists in Germany that were very deeply invested with Sanskrit, and there is a certain, I don't know, connection to Sanskrit, and it was very important. This I'm not sure how it is in America, for example. I'm sure that there are regional differences, but I couldn't work out any very concise difference there. Thanks.
No question. I think we're already on the section of opening the floor to
we are not sure we have more questions at the moment. So Borayin, if you have another one you would like to ask, or if Laura, you would like to say anything. If not, we'll find a question.
No, I do have a number of questions, so I'll just ask another one. And we came a little short on methodology, and you sort of hinted to that in towards the end of my last question. If you want to sort of just give, I think one of the highlights for me in your book is the interdisciplinarity, and also taking seriously the experiences and the sort of the incorporation of what we can call yoga philosophy into daily life, but also through somatic experience, embodiment, and body work, as you call it. So if you could just talk a little bit about methodology in that context, it would be great.
Yes. Maybe it's interesting because it's something that I tried out, that I talk a bit about that body knowledge categories, about how to do somehow embodied research, but also how to analyze in cultural studies body techniques. I use this framework from religious aesthetics, scholar Anne Koch, my professor, having different body knowledge categories like body scheme or proprioception or muscle tone, tattooing. It's getting too far to explain them, but it was very helpful to have categories for body knowledge to look at the practices that I looked at, because what happened is there are practices in the field like asana, which is very movement based, but bandha, which is a maybe muscular contraction that is not that visible, but changes things in the body, or breath and so on. So these are practices that are taught in the field as part of the method. But then if you have these categories, you can look at other practices that are not taught as part of the practice in the field, for example, touch. So you can look at, okay, touch is a practice in the field in assists, adjustments, and how could one also take these practices seriously as part of the experience and part of the body knowledge that people gain. So these body knowledge categories that I used were very helpful for getting a bigger view on practices in the field, not only the emic ones, but also to look at, I mean, the ones in the emic discourse, but really to look at what makes contemporary yoga maybe really a different experience to what a I don't know, hatha yogi in the medieval age experienced. For example, touch, the culture of touch, of being touched, of being really moved in the body with the help of other hands. So we can somehow with these categories also see how the practice changes and how the experience coming out and the body knowledge coming out of that practice changes. There was very interesting in having the body-centered approach, for example.
Laura, we might just interrupt. We have one more question, and it'll be the final question. We'll unmute Elizabeth from here.
Hi, Laura.
Hi, Elizabeth. Thanks for joining.
Hi there. Yeah, just a very quick question, because we are, I think, already a little bit over time. If you had to give one characteristic of this contemporary yoga philosophy, I have a slight suspicion this might overlap a bit with Matilda's work.
Yes.
What would it be? Will it have to do with movement?
You mean if I would have to take out one of my 6 characteristics, which would be the most important, or what is the question?
If I understood, because I don't know anything at all about your work, excuse me if I sound a bit confused about it. The 6 characteristics that you just listed before are to do with the relationship between the Yoga Sutra, how the Yoga Sutra is treated. Is that right?
Yes.
Right. Whereas what I was asking is, in kind of practice, if there is, if you had to describe to somebody completely ignorant like me, what is a key characteristic of contemporary yoga philosophy, how would you put it in a nutshell? What is its most, what makes it different from all the others?
Yeah, but I think what makes me a bit confused is that you already talk about practice, because this is one of the characteristics. One of the characteristics is the reference to the physical practice. So, for example, when people in my field engage with the term samadhi, this term was connected to a flow state that they experience in practice. So, for example, this continuously connecting contents of yoga philosophy, of old yoga, of Patanjali's contents, continuously trying to connect them with their experience stemming from their physical practice. So this is one of the key characteristics that I worked out. So interpretations of Patanjali's Yoga Sutra are informed by the experiences from today's practices.